going on, guys? For this tutorial, I'm going to be showing you how to make a lot of different glitch textures and covering multiple methods of how to achieve these kinds of results based on what you have and what your workflow is and what your preferences are for the types of sounds that you like to make or want to hear. Generally, when I think of glitching, I usually think of it as an instrument of percussion, but it can also be used as an effect. You can create risers or sweeps out of it. It really just depends on what it is that you're trying to achieve, but I'm going to show you some creative approaches to how to achieve certain sounds. Let's start with this one. What's going on is I have these 128 racks that have 128 samples in between, and what I've done was basically set up a chord so that they're all going to play at once. Now, if I play them all at once, only one sample is going to play because I have these set on one as far as the choke. This can be used to our advantage when we add an arppegiator, because whenever we start playing this with these different settings, it will actually start to create different tonal. So if you're playing with this in conjunction with moving the knobs, then you'll get a lot of crazy stuff. So I'll just do a brief demonstration of what I'm talking about. So as you can tell, there's a lot of different things that you can get, and by setting up a resampling channel, which is what I've done here, I've kind of just bounced out different things. If you have a MIDI controller, then it's a lot easier to get results that you're looking for quicker, because you don't have to sit there and automate one knob at a time. Like I have a push 2, so I can just turn all the knobs at once and then mess with this mess with the rate and the gate, and also switching between sync and free with my left hand while I'm using the knobs on my right hand. So it's pretty intuitive when you bounce that out. But yeah, that's what I've basically done here in a different session. As you can tell, there's a lot of different types of texture movements, and honestly this is pretty usable already, provided that you give it a little bit of EQ and maybe some saturation, or if you find one hit that you like, you can use it as a click or a snare layer, or I don't know. There's no right or wrong way to do this stuff. I'm just teaching you how to make sound. So moving on this particular bounce out, I have these 2 glitch racks that will cover some effects of how you can use effects to achieve some of the similar results. So what I've got on this rack in particular is a simple delay. You can also use a ping pong delay. An LFO that's modulating the time, and then a grain delay that I usually do by hand. Now on this simple delay, if you right click and go to repitch, then you'll start to get some really cool textures that will mess around with the pitch. It will sound almost like it's scratching as opposed to long or short delay times. So let's take a listen to that. So you can actually mess with this too. The rate is set at 1/2 just because that's the default setting that I left it at whenever I save the rack, but you can add some jitter, which I've already done, or you can smooth it out like this. You can do different shapes and basically just mess with that. You can also play with the feedback. This in conjunction with grain delay will give you some really cool sweeping sounds though. So it's pretty dramatic, and there's different parameters that you can mess with too. But playing with the time will also give you these cool artifacts and stuff, and then if you pitch it down and all that, then it's pretty neat with what you can get. Now, if you're thinking about using this as a means to create percussive loops, then that's when you would get creative and go into audio and kind of just chop things up. This is very basic and not something that I'd use particularly in a track or something I like, but just so you can have a demonstration purpose of how you can create loops with this. And then at the end I have this used as a little sweep. That might have been a little quiet, but that's okay. Just because you have this chunk of sound doesn't necessarily mean that you have to play the whole phrase. You can cut it up into little bits and bloops and beeps and whatnot, which is what I suggest that you do with all of this stuff, because that's how I use it. Again, it's just some creative approaches to taking something that sounds like absolute crap and making something cool with it. So moving on, let's go into the second glitch rack, which is a little bit more in depth. These are some third-party plugins that I have that I like to use every so often. Well, I guess it's in combination with some of these other ones. Yeah, so this is an actual glitch plugin called Tornado, and what I've done is there's a dictator setting that when you move this knob, it's going to move all of these knobs put together, and I basically have that set up on an LFO, but you'll see that this is kind of moving to create some cool stuff. And let's take a listen to how that sounds quickly. Yeah, I like that a lot. And again, because you're doing glitching and stuff, you don't really have to worry about the mix of it because you're probably going to high pass it and turn it down anyways. So destroy the sound, have fun with that. Next up we have Redux, and typically the only thing that I use is the down sample because it basically just down samples it with bit crusher, whatever. You can do the bit reduction and whatnot, but sometimes like if you turn it down too far, you get these really harsh sounds and it hurts my ears. So I'm not going to do that to you guys. Let's take a listen to how that sounds. That's something that you can do if you want it to sound more low quality or lo-fi or something. Next up we have Resonators. I got this from Vorso. Thanks, buddy. The only reason why I use this is if I want everything to have a tone. So right now it's set to F because most of the tracks I've been writing have been in F. This will kind of give it an actual tone so that if you have these percussive elements or something, you can essentially create a melody out of them. But the only problem is that there's only one sound that it makes, so you have to kind of find the balance between a dry wet. But let's listen to how that sounds. So you can tell that every time there's a transient or there's sound that it will carry, it's hitting F0. And you can create a chord with this. It's a neat thing that you can play with. I've seen that used on a bass as well, but I'd rather just create the tone from the source sound as opposed to using resonators. Next up, we have another delay called Replica Eckstein. This is one of my favorite synths for building pads or drones or something, just because the diffusion delay in particular is something I just love the way it sounds. So that's something that you hear in a lot of my stuff. But you can kind of abuse it and go into, well, whatever. I'll just turn some knobs. It also has some effects built into here that you can mess with, but I'm not going to really get into that too much right now. Alright, so let's mess with this delay and see what happens. You can also play with some of these special effects and all that to get some really strange things, so maybe I'll do like one or two of these, see what happens. So yeah, if you're looking to create more drones or something, then you can basically get a lot of really cool tones out of that. Or I imagine that it's possible to use this in conjunction with the micro pitcher, as we did on the first glitch rack, to kind of create that weird scratching sound. Movement's kind of cool. This is supposed to be a rhythmic generator, but I don't know, I get varied results out of it. But basically it has a combination of its own effects, and the big draw of it is using 4 different modulation sources. LFOs, a stepper, and you can use a total of 4 different ones to affect a total up to 8 different effects. You know, you can imagine some cool things that you can get out of that. Here's a preset I think that I like. I like that one. Yeah, you kind of get the idea about how that works, and then of course you can bounce that out to audio. So frequency shifter is the next effect that I would use. I have this in conjunction with an LFO. If you turn the dry wet down, then you'll get some really cool effects. That's some really cool way to get like some laser type sounding effects, and you can do this all by hand. I find that using envelopes and LFOs and all that in a kind of cohesive rhythmic function, it makes it easier to identify something that I would think is usable, and that goes same to my bass. If I'm doing like filtering or something, as opposed to trying to like just do a bunch of random stuff, I get more usable sounds if everything kind of is already in some rhythm or another, and then I can mess with that rhythm and, you know, time stretch it and all that stuff to change it. But it just makes things easier for me, and that's my personal workflow. So that's the second glitch rack. It's not like I use all of these together at once. It's just kind of like a, hey, here's some ways to chop up your audio and get different cool sounding things. So finally, I have a granulator. There are some really cool things that you can do with this. I'm not going to teach you how to make this as this particular rack because I'm going to divert you to Frequent on how to do that. And the reason why is because he explains it incredibly well. However, with some proper tweaking and kind of like a general, some general parameters and whatnot set up, you can also achieve some really amazing results out of this. So I'm going to put the mic down and then just kind of like hold a note and tweak some knobs and you'll see what I mean. But yeah, these are some creative ways that you can set up some really nice glitching textures. I know that there's probably a billion other techniques, but this is just what I generally like to use. So if you guys have any questions or anything, then feel free to reach out, and I hope that this is useful to some of you guys for someone who wants to make IDM or glitchy textures in their music, because it sounds awesome.